How do we go from the world's largest demonstration, the Women's March, to this moment? This week, when asked by reporters, not one women's organization, except for Matriarch, issued a comment in response to the corroborated sexual assault allegation by Joe Biden's former staffer, Tara Reade. When reporters asked female icons in the Senate and Congress, from Senator Gillibrand to Speaker Nancy Pelosi, if they believed Tara Reade, if they believed women, their response was that they believed Joe Biden. I think we are past the point of debating whether or not Tara Reade's story should be or not be investigated or believed. Yes, we are in the middle of a presidential campaign, and Joe Biden is the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party. But these political strategies to beat Trump are revealing the Democratic Party's worst traits right now. The Democratic establishment is so afraid that Joe Biden will be weakened that they are abandoning the values that they have branded around for the last few years, the MeToo movement, believing women, and even holding Democrats to account on these issues. Let me be clear. This story is not going away. The New York Times just called for an investigation, and that's way too late. Barely anyone even noticed Hillary Clinton's endorsement of Joe Biden, which conveniently came the same day CNN covered Tara Reade's allegations. In fact, the women that Joe Biden may think are covering for him are becoming a story themselves in revealing their interest in maintaining power over sticking to the values that got them their power and into their positions today. There's a special place in hell, isn't there? This story is not going away. The latest reporter to corroborate this story, Rick McHugh, was one of the brave reporters, along with Ronan Farrow, to go against some of the very same establishment when unveiling the Harvey Weinstein story. The story is not going away. So my question to Democratic feminists and women's groups and leaders who have championed the MeToo movement and raised a lot of money off of supporting victims, rightfully so. My question is, are you willing to exercise your power when it matters? When it's tough? When you may tick off some donors? Whether women are part of this conversation or not, this story is blowing up. So isn't it better to be part of the conversation and ask Joe Biden the questions on our terms rather than Donald Trump's? Think about it. If notable feminists issued their demands of Joe Biden today, he would be forced to respond and likely comply with the demands. And that's good for Joe Biden because it shows that he's taking this a little bit seriously. And it shows that the Democrats may not be hypocrites when it comes to issues related to Me Too and women. Because we know that Trump will try to label Democrat as hypocrites. We know all of the worst arguments that we made against Trump are weakened when Democrats are exposed as hypocrites. This is all if Joe Biden continues to do nothing. All if women's groups and leaders continue to act as cover for him, whether intentional or not, whether silent or not, whether giving vague statements or not. If Biden wants to use women's groups and women as cover, the smartest thing that these groups and women can do is to make him take responsibility. Make him listen to their demands. One demand, very simple and obvious demand women could be making, is to appoint female representatives from national women's groups and unions to the vice presidential selection committee, and for Joe Biden to kick the sexual perp Chris Dodd off of that 4-person committee that is supposedly selecting his female Democratic vice presidential choice. Now, maybe the establishment thinks that, okay, we're 6 months away from the election and this is all going to blow over, especially if feminists can help quash the story by minimizing and questioning the allegations. But the establishment should be more concerned at this point in revealing themselves as power-hungry hypocrites that stand for absolutely nothing, and how that will be used as a political weapon in the general election. Perhaps even more so than this jaw-dropping allegation itself. In other words, the establishment is writing Donald Trump's attack ads by abandoning all the principles that they've stood by, even when campaigning against him, by not taking Reade's corroborated allegations seriously, by not believing women. Does the emperor have clothes? Do women's groups, to which we've all organized with and gotten arrested with and donated money to, do they want to exercise how important they are in this party, in this movement, in politics, where they can actually win concessions because Biden has absolutely no choice? Well, they can control the narrative around this story before the MAGA movement sinks its teeth and lumps in every victim-denying female leader with Biden's record with women, including the Hyde Amendment, the Anita Hill hearings, touching women inappropriately, and of course, the corroborated Reid allegations. This is the ultimate test for the MeToo movement. Are we willing to sabotage this movement and political careers of female leaders and hand the narrative over to Trump? Or do we want to exercise the power we have over the Biden campaign to answer our demands above and beyond an appearance on Morning Joe, where he shifted the burden to a process? Because that's what machine politicians do. They create commissions, investigations, more process. They delay, delay, delay. If this is about politics, feminists, don't abandon your principles. You cannot surrender a hard-fought movement of decades to an incompetent campaign. Biden will be tested by this story. He is being tested by this story. But Biden should be answering to us, not to Donald Trump. And if Biden is the nominee at this point, then his campaign strategists need to wake up and have an action plan to answer to us. Stop kicking us down, stop erasing us, stop sending out your surrogates to attack the left and to attack feminists. But we have a duty to speak up and issue our demands, not stay silent as our leaders champion Republican talking points. That's essentially spitting in the face of decades of feminist organizing and advocacy. Does the emperor have any clothes? I think we're all pretty convinced that Amazon is not going to be at the forefront of labor representation and change anytime soon. Jeff Bezos has become the poster child of what bad leadership looks like, whether it's exploiting workers or, building helicopter pads or, maneuvering big tax breaks. New York has definitely been at the center of much of these conversations. And in light of COVID, he has been rightfully so attacked for not protecting his workers at Amazon. And thank God for the workers, because Chris Smalls is one of those Amazon workers who was fired by Amazon. And this story was so fascinating and so important that it got all the way to insider meetings with Jeff Bezos himself. And now Chris Smalls is leading an effort with Amazon strike, and he is the leader of that effort. So I just want to thank Chris for joining us. I know these are crazy times and they're unpredictable, so I appreciate what you're doing so much for the movement and getting the story out.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And you forgot to mention he wanted to build a spaceship.
Oh, who could forget that? I want to see him do it though with his hands.
Right. Right. Wait for that.
So I got to ask you. Let's talk about. You worked at Amazon in Staten Island, which is, for people who don't know New York, it's part of New York. It's one of the 5 boroughs. There is a center there. It's a warehouse. Is that correct?
Yeah, fulfillment center. Yep. Okay. One of the largest ones.
So what did you do? Working at Amazon, how long did you work there, and what were your duties?
Yeah, I've been with the company since 2015. I started off actually making $12.75 when I got hired back then. I was a regular warehouse associate. I worked my tail off for about 7 months, and I was promoted up to a process assistant, which is more of the lower level management, still hourly associate, but it's a supervisor for AKA terms. And I was responsible for the outbound pick department, which is the department that picks the customer orders before they be packed out and shipped out. Okay. I opened up 3 buildings for this company. I started off in New Jersey. I transferred to Connecticut for some time, over a year there. And then I transferred to Staten Island when it opened up over 2 years ago.
What is the vibe like in the company? I mean, is there accountability? Can a worker go to its, whoever their leader is, their boss, and file complaints? Do they listen to the workers?
It depends on who you work with. That's how I look at it. Every building was different for me, had different experiences, but it's really the people above you that make the job either better or worse. And it could be a tough position to be in as an employee there. I tell people how it is. I don't sugarcoat nothing. That's why people used to love working for me and working under me, because I wasn't typical. I wasn't the typical manager that go by the book. We there for long hours, for multiple days. I try to make your job as easy as possible. That was my motive, and I continue to do that still. Just not as an employee anymore.
Yeah. So let's talk about what happened. You were fired from Amazon. Why?
For speaking up the truth, speaking truth to power. I raised my health and safety concerns beginning of March. I noticed my employees, my colleagues around me were becoming sick, and a domino effect. They were fatigued, they were dizzy. Some of them were even vomiting at their workstations. Some of them had flu-like symptoms. We were still business as usual. We were having parties in the middle of March with DJs, popcorn machine. I was watching the news every night. I don't know what everybody else was doing, but what I was watching was scary. And the way we operate, I knew we were at risk. And I tried to get everybody quarantined before we even had any confirmed cases. I wanted to be proactive instead of reactive. Because we didn't have any cases at the time. I mean, not to our knowledge. They pretty much swept me under the rug. That forced me to take further action. So behind the scenes, I started sending out emails to the CDC, the health department, the state of New York. I did everything I could in my power. I didn't get no response because New York is the epicenter. So when I returned back to work on March 24th, my colleague, a supervisor, she was sick. Her eyes were bloodshot red. She was fatigued. She was sluggish. She told me she went for testing the night before. And we all know you don't get the test unless you are showing severe symptoms. So the policies allow for her to come back to work because you're not quarantined officially until they receive physical documentation, which can take days or weeks. I told her she should go home like immediately. And then she's my friend, so she did. 2 hours later, we learned about our first positive case in our managers meeting that we have every day. And that's when they told me not to tell the employees. We don't want to cause a panic. We don't. Wow. Yeah. So we're going to the individuals on that side of the building where the associate was last working. Didn't make any sense to me because we don't know how long he had it. We don't know where he got it from. And plus, on top of that, we had the Queens, New York facility that had one case. They closed down. They sent everybody home with pay. Everybody returned back the next day. I was expecting Staten Island to do the same thing, that didn't happen. So that day was my last time working for Amazon. When I went home that day, I started sending out emails again, this time to the media, because I wanted the media to know what's going on. Once again, I didn't get any response. So I had to go back to work, but I didn't go back to the building to work. Actually, I went back to sit in the cafeteria for 8 hours a day.
Sorry. You for a second. There you go.
Yeah, people's calling me. For 8 hours a day, I sat in the cafeteria, off the clock on my own free will, telling the employees the truth that they possibly been exposed to somebody who tested positive. I did that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, March 28th is the day they quarantined me. Only me, by the way. They didn't quarantine none of the employees that were around my colleague who I sent home. But 10 hours a day, multiple days in a row. They didn't even quarantine the person that I ride to work with every single day. So that tells you right there that, I had a target on my back.
So quarantine was essentially a way for them to pull you away from organizing, your coworkers and informing the media about what was happening on the ground. That was their excuse.
Pretty much. They wanted to cut off the head of the snake. I guess I was kind of being a pest, which I didn't care. I was being a pest to them, coming into the general manager's office every single day with groups of 10, voicing our concerns. But I was doing anything and everything until the building was closed down. And I think that was just their way of just silencing me.
How did your coworkers respond?
They were upset. They're still upset to this day. I still talk to them on a daily basis. They're supportive. And a lot of them haven't been to work ever since. A lot of them haven't been paid for over a month up until present day.
Wow.
So this is what we're going through. This is the position that the richest man in the world have these people in. I have friends that had to sleep in their cars for a number of days because they've been sick. They got 3 kids at home. They got a wife at home. And they don't want to infect them. They don't want to infect their coworkers. So it's a sad situation, and this is the reason why we're mobilizing, and I continue to fight every single day.
So the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, has backed you up in calling out Amazon for its treatment of workers. How did that happen, and what is she doing as Attorney General?
Well, yeah, Letitia James, and along with a lot of different politicians, have been backing me up and sending demand letters to them. It's been very uplifting and empowering for these prominent people to do that for me, along with my legal team. So we're fighting tooth and nail, hand in hand, until this company do the right thing and possibly reinstate me. But we're still to be determined on that. But yeah, I'm very grateful for everybody that's been speaking up on my behalf.
So now you're organizing this Amazon strike. What does that mean? Is it local? Is it national? How is this coming about?
It's actually national, but it's more so international. I've been speaking to employees and organizations and unions from all over the world, in several different countries: Germany, France, Italy, Spain. I actually just got off the phone with India as well. So it's amazing how much smaller the world is now. I never thought I would be speaking to people in different countries, but here I am. And I'm just trying to, I already formed the alliance. I've been orchestrating conference calls every week, multiple times a week. We all have one common goal right now, and that's just to protect our communities, protect our families, and be protected while we're at work. That's all we're asking for. And I don't think it's that too much to ask. I think these companies, these billionaires, have more than enough money to take care of everybody's needs and demands.
Especially right now. I mean, they're running out of supplies. Amazon is what everybody's going to, and Jeff Bezos has indicated that even,
right,
stock choices. It's been reported that he had this private meeting with his, advisors or senior team, and they talked about you. What have you learned from that?
Well, we learned the truth. We learned who these people are. We learned what type of conversation they have. It's very distasteful and shameful that they think of, minorities like that. If you look at it, this phrase that they use, that lingers in the Black and brown community. And that right there, I'm kind of actually, in a sense, I'm thankful that the fact that the truth came out about the type of people Jeff Bezos have around him. Yeah. So that's all I have to say about that. It would never be Amazon versus Chris Smalls. It's going to be Amazon versus the people. They have to answer to all of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Has there been any legal action taken against him or Amazon?
Yeah, legal actions are in effect right now. The courts have been closed, so we couldn't really file anything, but we sent out demand letters and waiting on responses.
Okay, so as for this strike, what can we as citizens do that may not work for Amazon to support you?
I've been saying this in a lot of interviews already, but as a consumer, if you want to practice real social distancing, stop clicking the one-click lie. Stop clicking the button. You might save lives. Stop clicking the button. Amazon is not a necessity. It's a fairly new company. It grew and evolved into what it is. We helped do that. I remember growing up, going to the grocery stores. Society kind of forgot about that. We have that luxury to hit the click button and we have a package deliver, but you're putting several people at risk, including yourself. This virus does live on cardboard for a number of days. You have to take that all into consideration. So if I was you, I would boycott.
Yeah. And it's so complicated because they've become a monopoly. I mean, they have servers, for instance, where people house their websites. And I mean, it's crazy to see how much this company is finding a way to penetrate every aspect of our life. Television shows, I mean, we know what the jam is, but the least that people can do is not order their supplies and goods that, many are relying on right now from Amazon. You can go directly to the distributor. You can go directly to, through another company. Even corporation, if you want to go that route. Like, we ordered our water purifier just recently. We were trying to find it. We went right to the source. We went to the company and
right.
We're like, oh, I guess you can do this. So
right.
I know it sounds silly, but this stuff makes a big difference. And they should be, at least until they pay their pay fair wages and protect their workers. I mean, this is unfortunate. It's inhumane. It's not something that's reflective of New York City or the society that we live in. And I'm really glad that you had the courage to speak out and stand up and talk to your fellow workers. And, you're continuing to organize, because it really, it takes someone like you who has that courage, but you're one person, and look at the effect you've had, just in the last month on pushing back and exposing Jeff Bezos. So I thank you. I think, your fellow workers, thank you. And listen, if it means he's going to pay some more taxes, maybe that's the concession here.
That's what you're working for. I think that should be an option as well. Definitely.
Yeah. Chris, is there anything else you want to add? I know you got to get to work organizing people across the world. This is amazing.
Yeah, I know. No, yeah, I think we covered everything, and I appreciate the time and giving us a voice, because I'm speaking up for the voiceless right now. So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Hope to have you on again soon, and we'll see the results of a successful strike.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Harvey, so much of this movement is young. It's millennials, the largest generation in history, most diverse and progressive generation in history, approaching 40 years old, with, experienced everything from wars to recessions to the economic crisis of 2008 to 9/11. And you have the Zoomers, who are now going to be experiencing this extraordinary circumstance without the leader that they have seen mostly in their adult lives, which is Bernie Sanders, take the lead in the movement. I think millennials like myself, we lost trust in the establishment, the Democratic establishment, when we saw Tim Geithner brought in right after the economic collapse, and much of what we were facing was not dealt with under the Democratic administration. And so, I mean, where do we go from here? Where does this generation, how do we organize? How do we defeat the establishment that flexed their muscles so hard to defeat us?
Well, look, a few weeks ago, you and I spoke of what would FDR do, right? And we spoke of that in hopes that Bernie Sanders was going to step forth and might actually, in light of the crisis, become the nominee, or at least that was the hope we might have shared. Look, we don't have an FDR today, obviously. We don't even have a Hoover, okay? Nor do we have the prospect of an FDR, okay? I mean, the least worst scenario is a Biden presidency. Did I say that right? The least worst scenario?
Yep.
Yeah. So, but here's the thing. My work, everyone thinks that I'm the FDR scholar, which maybe I am. But I wrote about FDR and what we call the greatest generation. And those folks were young, okay, in the 30s. They were 15-year-olds and 20-year-olds, and they made FDR great. And the thing is that they rallied and they mobilized. And I'll start off in the silliest of ways, which I may have mentioned to you. I know I've said to a few people. I mean, if you look back at the 30s, and it was miserable, and hundreds of thousands of young people were on the road just because their parents couldn't even keep them. Yeah. And they were lucky enough to have a president who was willing to mobilize their energies and all that. But it's also the case that there's a lot of energy amongst young people. And I don't, look, this crisis has yet to be figured out fully. But part of the figuring out is made a little bit easier because we have all of this social media. I mean, folks who are in their 20s and their 30s or even their teens have to realize that they're empowered in a way that other generations were not. And so, for example, I mean, the last couple of weeks, I think I was telling you before, young people, I do podcasts and radio and all that, and I have to be a good 30 years older than every one of the people that I'm dealing with, and I'm always impressed. Look, I mean, I'm concerned about whether or not we all can get our act together, whatever our ages, but I'm really impressed by the energy that exists. So, and by the way, and there's this multi-tiered kind of sort of, and I don't even want to call it alternative. I want to call it new media. So I do a radio show with a community group in New Orleans, or a podcast with a group that calls itself Highlands Bunker in Baltimore. I mean, so all across the country, there are these things.
Yeah.
as well as folks like you. I mean, you have a good reputation. Your following is going to grow. Michael Brooks, who's a dear friend, and his show is just literally exploding, you might say. And Majority Report seems to be, really thriving. Not to mention, we've got Rising in the morning. Okay, we've got Majority Report midday, which I've come to really make my midday scene. And then the Young Turks. And I know when I say that, everybody has their favorites and they'll scorn any one of those. But let's face it, I mean, there is this really thriving alternative media. I didn't even want to say alternative, but new media. Now, but on the same scale as cable news, well, nobody watching cable news anyhow. I mean, it's an addiction. It's not really something people do to learn very much, or at least I can't imagine they do. The mainstream media, I don't even know if it exists any longer, what we think of as mainstream media. So the thing is, we're really well positioned. I say we, because I'm not young, but we're really well positioned to create something. But the question is, can we create it in a way so that it doesn't become, because we cannot afford fragmentation right now. We can't afford splintering. We can't afford arguing over terminologies, okay? Even though I have my preferred terminology, we can't afford to argue over that. We have to realize that we are at this moment. Just back in the 30s, Harry Hopkins said, we can't waste a crisis. And I hate to quote, what's his name? Who was
Rahm Emanuel, who stole it.
He said we can't waste a crisis, but he wasted everything, basically. Yeah. But the thing is, we can't waste this crisis. And it is important that we create some kind of united left or popular front left. And in doing so, we should also try to imagine the ways of using media. I'll tell you something very interesting. I have no idea what will come of it. So I was on Rising last week, or maybe it was even this week. Everything's running together. And I happened to mention the idea, or maybe I mentioned it to you as well, that we have to think in terms of putting on a show, perhaps. And somebody heard me say that, and they contacted me from California today. Somebody whose husband was for a while a co-director of Second City in Chicago, and said, let's talk about what the possibilities are. So it strikes me that right in this moment, there are possibilities. And whether or not we can pull it off will hang on your generation's sort of energies and creativities and your willingness to reach out, basically, and pull people in. So I don't know if I'm being clear about that, but that to me is what this moment is about. Okay. So
that's,
now, what else are we going to do?
That's the media side. And I think that's, valid. I think without going off too much on this, and we'll talk about it another time on the show, there's a lot of conversation about, we need to build our own version of MSNBC. And I'm going to use as an example without going too far into the media argument. Every couple of years, the left says, for the last decade and a half, we need to do a left version of MSNBC. And every couple of years, the left learns that our structure is different. And I think now more than ever, we can't be thinking about how to fix the audience that is, like you said, brainwashed, addicted to MSNBC because they don't know otherwise. And they also happen to be the audience that is a prime voter in a Democratic primary in key states that won Biden the election. That's the issue. It's the demographic. But that demographic is getting smaller and smaller. It is, some of them are waking up. Some of them are, passing away if they're on the older end. And our side, the below 50 side, is only getting bigger and bigger as voters because they're aging out and wanting to vote. And we're also on a different platform. We should be thinking as the left about how we as consumers consume media that are below 50, and it's becoming more and more decentralized. Having a central place is like, okay, it's like when Air America joined, we were like, we're going to do right-wing radio. Well, we don't listen to it the same way that the right wing does. Right. And so it's very similar. Like, we are now looking at Twitch. I mean, if Twitch was not the future, if these other applications were not the future, then why would Amazon be buying them? Why, if people weren't watching decentralized media on YouTube, then why is it that YouTube decided to give deals to companies, as we're on YouTube? I have to be a little bit careful here. So in terms of like moving forward, every couple of years, we face a loss, and then we think, oh God, we have to do this. So how do we learn from mistakes moving forward and not repeat the mistakes every 2 years, like the third party?
Yes. Well, I have an idea before we leave the media question, or that may be the only question we can deal with today. I've been thinking about this afternoon in particular. This has been on my mind for a while. I grew up in the New York area. So I love New York. I love Brooklyn. I love New Jersey. I love the whole area. I want to make that clear. But it is.
I love Astoria.
There you go.
Sorry.
It's funny when I'm back in New York a lot. I used to say way out in Astoria, but that's not. But I won't go there right now.
Progressive haven.
So here's the thing. The thing is, however, is that out here in Wisconsin, where I've lived now for 40 years as a professor and a left person, I always say to myself, I'm really, really tired of the fact that the left voice that we get nationally is out of the East.
Right.
Or, in the case of TYT, the West.
LA, yeah.
Now, I know you're in Arizona right now, but I assume as things improve, you may well leave. What I want to know is, and I know there have to be, I know there are podcasters out here, I know there are people on, but how do we create it so when we say national, we don't just mean it goes national, but how do we get the Midwestern perspective into these kinds of media? How do we do that? So in some ways, the idea of a network isn't a bad idea. But if somebody wants to develop that network, not for the idea of television, for the idea of these sort of social media sites, we've got to figure out a way so that the Midwest is represented and the voices are heard. This is just something that's been on my mind today, okay? I mean, we've got big cities here too. We've got Chicago.
Jacobin's out of Chicago. I mean, a lot of, there's, in these times, I mean, isn't it in these times out of Chicago?
In these times is, yes.
Yeah.
But, right, and it's been around for an awfully long time, and I can tell you that it would be I feared the possibility years ago that in these times might not survive, and it is doing very well. But what I'm getting at is not just in the print media that we need more. Like Michael's in Brooklyn, and you're going to be back in New York, and Majority Report is out of New York, and Crystal is by way of Rising is down in DC. There ought to be something more. This isn't a lament. This is a call.
Well, some of these hosts, I mean, just to play it fair, because I think I want to talk more about just electorally how we move forward in the movement. That's okay, because Human Rights Report, David Dole's out of Toronto. There are people who are out of different places that have big followings.
Human Rights Report is great. That's Portland.
Portland, right? No, but David Dole's out of Toronto, who's Rational National. So there are people who are doing incredible work that are in other pockets of the country. Keeping that in mind, moving forward with demographics, if COVID doesn't change things, most people do live in cities, and I understand why that is a big perspective, but we also, as New York, we have a very different type of politics that is focused on demographics. That as a New Yorker, as a former New Yorker, that the way that they carve up districts is based on ethnic neighborhoods. And so you'll hear about this vote and that vote and this vote. And then it becomes part of the rhetoric. Like, I need to appeal to XYZ and you're not appealing to this. And so then you have this identity, the identity factions kind of playing against each other in some scenarios or working with each other. Yeah. But that doesn't work for national politics. And I think that's kind of what you're hinting at here, is that Bernie may have gotten a little bit off that.
Right. No, but let's face it. I mean, the Democrats lost Wisconsin, Michigan. I mean, something has to happen.
They also didn't go there. So.
Yes, thank you. I mean, that very term, there are two terms that I despise hearing: flyover country and the Rust Belt.
Oh.
Sorry.
I'm from Buffalo, so that's about as Rust Belt as you could get. So, all right, shifting gears a little bit here. We, I think, are very unclear of what our power is in this unique moment, and I think it'll become more and more clear as the weeks go on, and we see how Biden engages with us. But as a movement, aside from presidential politics, what leverage do we have? What power should we be focusing on? What fights should we be fighting?
I think there was a very interesting piece the other day in the New Republic, and it was a depressing piece, but it wasn't ultimately depressing, because in the very last paragraph, it really talked about staying out. And what it really implied had to do with the power, maybe the power of labor may well be the place we really need to be looking. And I'll do that at several levels. So for example, look, what has really been the story that's really kind of drawn our attention on the left? The Amazon workers, the workers who are doing jobs that are underpaid and they're just, in a fashion, they're as frontline as everyone else because they're the supply chain, you say. And the fact is that if they stay out, that supply chain is in deep shit.
Right.
So the thing is that we really ought to be doing what we can to constantly be talking, and we shouldn't be wasting our time on too many things that don't involve working people and labor. And the other thing is, and this began over a year ago. Sarah Nelson.
I was just going to mention her. Just talked to her today.
Excellent. And we have we don't talk on the phone terribly often. Though she called last week because she wanted to get out the word, about what Mnuchin was going to try to do, right? Yes. And so the thing is that there we have there's an example before this crisis. And now we're in a crisis in which the powers of labor become all the more significant. So what I would say is that we want to attend all the more to the question of labor and working people and solidarity with working people, and try to imagine how to cultivate those kinds of solidarities and support systems.
I'm glad that you bring up Sarah Nelson, because she's the first person who came to mind when you mentioned labor and the supply chain, because she has been able to articulate in an extremely effective way that reaches across party lines that this bill right now, and I want to get the number right because I took notes earlier today, is what is it? It's $450 billion, right? That she is pushing to be, she and this coalition, Sarah Nelson, who is the president of Flight Attendants Workers, part of CWA, is to go directly to payroll for the airlines. And what role the airlines play is not just as a business, but some of these smaller and mid-sized regional airlines are at risk of closing by next week. And what does that mean for supply chain? Well, right now we're dependent on mail being flown around the country. We're dependent on pharmaceuticals, on medical supplies and equipment. And if an already hurting airlines industry, with the strongest one being Delta, which is the weakest when it comes to labor, is in crisis, we have an ability to communicate that to red states, to all lawmakers. And there's real pressure points here. And what I think is so admirable about Sarah Nelson is that she sees where those pressure points are, and she knows how to apply them and use organizing to apply them in effective ways at the right moment. And I think there are so many lessons to be learned from her, being one of those leaders who gets it. And as a movement, I wish Bernie got it the way she did, because I think we'd be in a very different place right now. Win or lose, I think we'd be in a different place.
Yeah, so do I. And if people aren't aware of the fact, of course, the presidency of the AFL-CIO is on the agenda, just over the horizon. Yes. She's not the only candidate, but anything you can do to talk her up, all of you folks out there, and give her support, I urge you to do so.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So with that being said, I think we're going to wrap up in a second, but I think the last question I would ask you is, electoral politics is a big factor here. And we have been able to take some seats as progressives legislatively and Congress, of course, and shift the agenda. Whether or not that agenda we have big wins or don't, it's now something that is being discussed, whether it's Medicare for All, the Green New Deal. There's quite a bit here, $15 minimum wage. Labor just in general, protecting labor, like that's a thing back in the Democratic Party. Moving forward with electoral politics, there's, this is a mistake that was made last time around, but it's real. And it's something that I think divides our movement, is people get frustrated, throw their hands up in the air, and they say, okay, third party, or I'm bowing out. Go. You have the floor, sir.
Look, both the structures and the finances and the imagination will not support third-party endeavors. Okay, I confess in 1980 I voted third party for the Citizens Party with Barry Commoner. Okay, and I will never make that mistake again. I would say, look, in some ways, staying home is smarter, perhaps, in boycotting than it would be to vote for third party. But I'm not telling people to boycott. This is my ambivalence right now. I do not want to vote for Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Let me make that absolutely clear. But it is the case that Donald Trump represents a fascist politics. And what we need, and the tragedy is that we don't have the leader right now to carry out the deal. And as far as I'm concerned, if young people, older people could get it together on the left, but instead of saying on chat rooms, on Twitter, I will not vote for Biden, it's give me a reason to vote for Biden.
Right.
There ought to be this as loud a voice as possible on the left. Give us a reason to vote for you. We know what's wrong with you. Give us a reason to vote for you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. And moving forward electorally, I mean, how do we tell people to stay engaged? I really have a tough time with articulating to folks why we can take over the DNC and why that matters. They don't love me at the DNC. Spoiler alert. I'm not a DNC hack, spoiler alert, but I also see the pressure points there, maybe the way that Sarah Nelson does in much bigger ways, but seeing the process there is something that is actually, if we get our act together and focus, we can disrupt and possibly even win. And I think if Bernie actually saw that a little bit more, we probably would have been able to do more. But we don't have Bernie as a movement, and that was our leverage. It was this united force, and having him and being able to influence him, pluses and minuses. So now we have to build a coalition that is arguably larger than Bernie and without Bernie. So where do we go? How do we do that?
Well, I mean, I can give you all the problems. Giving the solution is the hard part. Look, I mean, people say to me, is there anyone in age between Bernie Sanders and AOC? Not that they should be the next candidate for president. There you go. Hey. No, but it is. Look,
no.
The sooner we can get all of you to be 40 years old and have some maturity, the better, it'd be great. No, but it is the case. I mean, there were other Democratic politicians who I have admired out there, but they so quickly lined up with the likes of Biden that it was outrageous. I mean, if you would ask me before Bernie Sanders had entered the race, who I really wanted to see in the race, it was Sherrod Brown.
Yeah.
Okay. But he got lost in all of this. And in fact, I thought he might have been the one person to sort of bring labor back in, into this Democratic mix. And maybe something's going on there. But right now, I mean, I too have been so fed up with the Democrats. I think they've been shameful. I think they're shameful in terms of their hostility to the very needs of working people, quite frankly. So, but what is the answer? I mean, the fact is we do have people in Congress. There are people who should step forward. I think Ro Khanna is a voice that we should make more of. I think there are people out there who had thought about entering politics these last several years. I'll mention a friend of mine. I think he has a future in Democratic politics, Joe Sandberg out in Southern California.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I mean, there are these folks and they're ready to move. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're already trying to figure out what is the next step. We need to have our eyes and ears open. I don't think we should become sectarian. That's the key thing.
Yeah.
The danger is that the left, the socialist left, will sort of pull away and become sectarian. And that has always been the problem in the past. Think 1930s. We don't have an FDR, but we have to think about some kind of united front. And we are positioned. When I say we, it's kind of, I feel a little guilty saying that, given, as I said before, a 30-year gap between the 40-year-olds and me. But it is the case that we are well positioned. And if you listen to even the likes of, he and I have yet to meet, but I think of him as a friend, Adolf Reed and others, you'll see the question is labor. The question is creating solidarities. The question is creating a united voice around the agenda that Bernie has himself advanced.
I agree. And I think, just to put a cherry on top of that, organizations that are democratically structured are the key allies in this fight. That's where you're going to get true solidarity, not this wishy-washy, sometimes I support you, sometimes I don't. So, we need to definitely support those organizations that are democratically structured, because, they're the ones who also are able to apply pressure and work with us on our behalves, because it's we don't want to have a situation like Warren. I mean, it was eye-opening to see too many organizations that we've done work for and lined up for decide to betray us, and not just betray us, but attack us. No,
that I'm not asking people to be pawns and deferential. Please, no. Okay, but you have voices that should be part of the conversation. Okay, and the other thing is, I've harped on this for years. I think it would really help if people paid a little more attention to the fact that there is a rich tradition of American progressivism and radicalism. And we really do need to understand that the solidarity should not only be generational in the contemporary sense, but we have to have solidarity with the generations before us and the generations yet to come.
Right.
Okay, just keep that in mind.
That's great. Harvey, thank you.
Thank you.
It's like going to therapy.
Great to see you.
Movement therapy with Harvey Kaye.
Next time we're on the couch.
Oh, I have to do that thing. Guys, make sure to click the likes, subscribe, the little bell to make sure you know when our new episodes are coming out. And if you're not a patron, now is the time. Independent media is definitely facing a little bit of a crisis since everyone's turning on CNN to watch the Cuomo brothers give their nightly reports on COVID. We definitely need as much support as possible. So if you have the ability to be a patron, go to patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. And Harvey has one more word.
Okay, this is a historical note. This Sunday is the 75th anniversary of the passing of Franklin Roosevelt, who was not simply a liberal, he was the social democratic president. And I happen to have a book coming out, in fact, it just came out this week, entitled FDR on Democracy. And those are the words that inspired young people of that day to move left, okay? Think about picking it up and reading it. FDR on Democracy. And
where would you do that? Because people can't go to bookstores anymore.
Okay. Well, if they go to if they go to my Twitter thing, Harvey @Harvey JK, there's a link to like a lot of different, everything from Barnes and Noble to IndieBound to Powell's. Every hour I try to switch the link.
Good.
So they can.
As long as it's not Amazon.
I've tried my best not to say Amazon these days. Absolutely, okay. And if they go to McNally, if you're in New York and you like McNally Jackson, go online to them. If you like university bookstores, go to them online. I mean, do what you have to. But it's a book that I spent a good deal of time, and it literally inspired me to read all of those speeches and turn them into this argument that we can do it again, almost. Okay.
Let's do it, guys. It's on us. Don't look to anybody. It's us. We got to do the work now. Yeah. All right. Take care, Harvey. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for watching. You can support The Nomiki Show on YouTube by clicking subscribe, like, and sharing. Because as you guys know, now more than ever, we have to support our independent media. We are being attacked from every angle, and everyone's watching CNN every night, so it's important that we take care of the good guys fighting the fight. You can also join us on Patreon for special content and interviews. We also have swag, like these new mugs, starting as low as $5 a month, which is, basically what an iced coffee is in Manhattan when we had iced coffee shops open. You can go to patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. So, the big question right now, I think, for all of us is what happens with Bernie's campaign? Is he staying in it to win it? Is he turning it into some other movement? Is this an anti-COVID task force? Luckily, it's like on cue. Our next guest wrote a book with Megan Day about Bernie Sanders, the movement, and how much it's so much bigger than him. The title of the book is Bigger Than Bernie: How We Go from the Sanders Campaign to Democratic Socialism. Micah Uetricht, thank you for joining us. You and Megan Day wrote this book. He's the managing editor of Jacobin. Big fan. Really excited to have you on. And what a great time for you to give us guidance while we're all locked inside and stressing about humanity. So
yeah, for better or worse, yeah.
What inspired you to write this book at this time?
Well, the beginning inspiration was just the fact that shockingly there were not very many books about Bernie Sanders out there. In fact, I don't even know of another single one off the top of my head, which is surprising given that I feel like Bernie's campaigns have reshaped American politics. I think that we will look back on these two campaigns, 2016 and 2020, as something like a Barry Goldwater run in 1964, right? Barry Goldwater was a hard right, libertarian-esque figure in the Republican Party who ran in 1964 and lost very badly for the Republican nomination for the presidency in 1964. And at the time, people were very dejected, but a movement came out of his presidency that culminated in Ronald Reagan and all the other bad things that have dominated American politics for the last couple of decades. Right. And so Bernie has an opportunity to potentially do the same thing, but for forces of good rather than forces of evil. And what is also so important about his campaigns is this is not just a theoretical speculation that this is going to happen. There's all of this momentum that has already come out of his campaign just in the last 4 years alone. I mean, these kind of big shifts take place over years and decades in American politics, but even over the last 4 years, we've seen an explosion of progressives running for elected office. We've seen people who are self-identified as democratic socialists running and winning for elected office everywhere from the House of Representatives to city councils and everywhere in between. We've seen an explosion of all kinds of groups, like ones that you're a part of, that you've started, like the Democratic Socialists of America, like all kinds of different, grassroots level movement activity that have been inspired by Bernie. People who have realized that we've all been told throughout our entire lives that you can't put forward these kinds of bold progressive policies in America. The American people just won't go for that kind of thing. And Bernie's campaign showed us that that's actually not true, that actually Americans are hungry for that kind of bold left-wing politics. So we thought we would write a book trying to synthesize all of those lessons that we've learned over the last couple of years through Bernie Sanders, and then where we go from here with all those lessons.
So what are some of the lessons that we have learned? I mean, we've had some great successes, but electorally, a lot of people have run as progressives, democratic socialists, including myself, who have not done as well as the more notable ones, like the Squad and some of the DAs and city council members. I wonder what we can learn from those experiences, but also what the establishment might be learning and using it against us moving forward.
Well, it is true that we've probably lost more than we've won over the last 4 years, but anybody who has been around the left socialist progressive movement knows that that's pretty much that's to be expected. We've eaten a lot of crap over the last couple of decades. So to me, what's more shocking is not that Bernie looks like he may not be about to win the presidency, but that Bernie got this far at all, and it gives us a foundation for a good foundation, a strong foundation for moving forward. I mean, we've seen people running for office and losing, but also in some really important ways, the ways that we synthesize in the book. We have a chapter, for example, that is on some electoral case studies of democratic socialists who have run for office. And two of the case studies are about cities where democratic socialists have won, Chicago, where I live, and New York City. And then we also have one that is about where a democratic socialist ran for state assembly in California in the East Bay and lost, but they lost in a way that made the democratic socialist movement, the infrastructure was laid to continue fights, beyond elections, for example, in the support of the Oakland teachers strike that happened last year and all kinds of other stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think we should, the left has a history of running for office to just kind of make a point to just take a stand for what's right. And that's noble, but of course we want to actually win. And we shouldn't, pat ourselves on the back too much when we lose. We should parse the lessons of why we lost. But I think we also shouldn't be totally dejected. I mean, and if you take the kind of 30,000 foot view of where we're at right now, we are in a better place moving forward to advance a left progressive politics than we have been, certainly in my lifetime and in at least half a century in this country.
So moving forward, what are some of these lessons that we could learn from the mistakes and especially for folks who maybe want to go at it again, somebody like a Javanka Beckles or Tiffany Caban or any of these
right.
candidates who got close or got a lot of attention, but could go again, or new candidates. I mean, we're entering a new landscape too, because I mentioned the establishment. Lucy Flores tweeted this out. Actually, I thought it was really smart. She said, "If they see you coming, they're much more dangerous. The establishment. If they don't see you coming, that's when you can surprise them and you can fly under the radar like AOC did, and thank God."
Right.
So what can we do to prevent them from outsmarting the establishment that's usually slow and clunky along the way?
Yeah, I think what Lucy Flores said is right, although if I were the establishment, I would be perhaps taking more of I would be adopting more of the Bernie Sanders rhetoric and the AOC rhetoric than they appear to be doing right now. They're not trying very hard to absorb all of our energy and all of our rhetoric and everything. But we've certainly seen, as I said, that Americans actually are hungry for a different kind of politics in this country, and people who want to tell you that, we would like to do all this progressive stuff, but people just won't go for it. I mean, they're selling you a bill of goods. Like, that's not actually true. We won't win every single time that we run progressive campaigns, and the rhetoric that a successful progressive campaign will look like obviously differs depending on the context that you're in. But the last couple of years should give lie to this idea that you can't run on bold progressive. I mean, we're winning the war of ideas. I mean, Medicare for all. We see these polls that show that a majority of Republicans, in some cases, even back Medicare for all. That was before the coronavirus crisis, in which now there are polls that are showing that the support for Medicare for all is higher than it's ever been.
And Donald Trump was playing with it today on Twitter.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, if Donald Trump is ahead of the curve and Joe Biden's still like, well, wait.
Well, exactly, and that's why I kind of what speaks to what I was saying before, is that, like, I don't think that they being the establishment really are rising to the occasion. They're still telling themselves like fables of how it is that Bernie Sanders was able to get as far as he was, and why people like AOC have won the elections that they've won. They don't seem to have fully. They're not doing what, as I said, what I would do to try to destroy people like me. And so I think the establishment is still very powerful, of course, and we see how mainstream media, how centrist Democrats will move heaven and earth. I mean, in the case of Joe Biden, they will all unite behind this guy who, it brings me no pleasure to say, like, has me very worried about his basic capacities to speak and to think. But they don't care. I mean, they would rather put someone like that up against Trump and lose, rather than see it, give up their power to a figure like a Bernie Sanders. So they're gonna move heaven and earth to continue to try to do what to destroy left-wing energy. But we have to keep fighting. I mean, we're winning on many fronts. The other part of what we talk in the book, I mean, the majority of the kind of case studies and the discussion of strategy going forward has to do with basically the two tracks. I mean, one, electoral stuff, which we all know is important, but two, grassroots movement organizing that is not totally operating within the electoral arena. I mean, we need fights within the labor movement. We need, rejuvenation of American unions, which are really stagnant right now during the coronavirus crisis. There's all these workers going on strike, and it feels like the majority of unions are just, they don't know what to do. They're not, people are like really scared and are terrified to go into work and are like going on their own strikes, an unorganized strike, and labor is not getting behind that. So we need, rejuvenated unions. We need these fights for affordable housing. We need, obviously, the fight for a Green New Deal, all these progressive pressures that we need to win the things that we all know that we need. And we need to build that stuff outside of elections. And our book, I mean, we talk about these kind of two tracks, but obviously the truth is that they're not like cut and dry. Like each one, it has to engage with the other. But we need people to get involved in that kind of grassroots movement organizing that is organizing outside of the every 2 or 4 years when we have elections.
Right. So let's touch quickly on unions, because I think that it's an incredibly timely point. I mean, there are videos going up daily of workers who are talking about their experiences of not being, they're being overworked, they're in unsafe and unhealthy circumstances, just generally speaking, but during COVID, even worse so, from big companies like Amazon to construction workers who are I don't know if you saw that video of the worker in Canada actually, at a construction site mobilizing and activating his fellow workers, and it looked like it was pulled from, the early 1900s. It was powerful stuff. So what can the left do? I mean, at this point, when unions are hurting and they're tied, most of the unions in America are tied to the Democratic establishment and not reflective of their base, everything from teachers to service workers, to domestic workers even. I mean, how do you mobilize and reform these institutions that are already hurting?
So I live in Chicago, and Chicago became pretty, nationally and internationally famous for the Chicago Teachers Union strike that happened here in 2012. And then there have been 2 others since then, as well as charter school strikes. And I wrote a book about that in 2014, and it was about how a group of activists within the union who were rank and file teachers, some of whom were socialists, a small number, but not all socialists, others just progressive-minded teachers and people who were pissed off that they're at their union, felt like that public education in the city of Chicago was under attack and their union wasn't doing anything about it. And so they got together and they started organizing, and they took over the union in 2010 and then went on this strike in 2012, and arguably were the inspiration for the teachers strike wave that kicked off in 2018 and really reshaped all of politics in the city of Chicago through that strike. They became like the anchor of the progressive political coalition in the city. And again, that's something incredible. We just elected half a dozen socialist city council members in Chicago, as well as more progressives beyond that. All of that was able to happen because this small kind of ragtag group of socialist and progressive and activist teachers got together and took over this union and engaged in strikes and had a new kind of progressive democratic, small d democratic militant unionism that saw its purpose as not just fighting for those teachers, but fighting for students, fighting for affordable housing, fighting for the whole working class of Chicago. And so, again, that was just average people who got together and did that and changed their unions. And so we have a whole section in the book on that, like the labor strategy, on how people can do that. I mean, all of us, I think it's important to have people who, host shows like this or who edit magazines or whatever. But the vast majority of us are, working jobs, sometimes crappy jobs that we don't like very much. You need to organize at work. Like if you don't have a union, you can create one at your job. If you do have a union and it's not fighting the way that it should be, you can get together with other people and change your union. And that is one of the most pressing tasks that we need right now, because unions at their best, in the way that they are at their best in Chicago, have such enormous social power, have the ability to really transform a political landscape. And so people who are progressives and leftists and socialists need to be seeing that as a key place for them to be fighting, whether we're in a pandemic or not. Right,
especially now. In so many different ways. How do you think that your tips and your guidance are going to be utilized reflective of this moment? I mean, you wrote this obviously at a different time and even published at a different time, but the tips are perfect for this moment that is just exposed all the flaws in our systems and our institutions and our economic, the way that we treat our workers, healthcare, of course, and even our electoralism. So, this is a great book for this moment, but how do you think it's going to be used moving forward? The tips.
Well, obviously, in some ways, everything feels like it's sort of out the window when you have this like once in a century pandemic happening. Yeah. But on the other hand, everything that is bad about this pandemic or almost everything that's bad is basically things that were already very bad times 5, times 10, times 100, And so left elected officials, as one example, are taking on a whole new role right now. You do see a figure like AOC or like Ilhan Omar playing the role of advancing a set of progressive demands that is not being advanced by the Democratic Party right now. They are the voice of the working class. They're the only ones who are, you look at a country like the UK, obviously led by a right-wing Tory government by Boris Johnson. Even Boris Johnson is providing like 80% of UK workers' incomes during this crisis. But the Democrats here, the supposed left-wing party in the United States, are not advancing that, but Ilhan Omar and AOC are advancing that demand. And so it's all the more important. Can you imagine how bleak it would be right now if we didn't have this small handful of left elected officials like Ilhan Omar or Bernie or the rest of them? Or in Chicago, our socialist aldermen are advancing the same kinds of bills on the local level that the mayor isn't touching. So there's a new level of importance of those kinds of figures. And I think that, as many people have noted, right now, a moment of crisis like this one is the opportunity. Things could either get a whole lot worse or they get a whole lot better. I mean, this opens up a whole new set of possibilities for us to make change in society. And if we are continuing to bang the drum on something like Medicare for All, which if people, the majority of Americans already supported Medicare for All before this pandemic, but I think that people are realizing like this is insane. Like we literally cannot get a hold on this crisis if like people are getting sick with coronavirus, but they're trained to not go to the hospital because they know that it's going to bankrupt them.
Or if they lose their jobs. I mean, as 30% of the workforce is about to. I don't even think the health insurance companies are going to be able to survive this, and then they'll want a bailout. If a third of their subscribers or more are suddenly not working with the health insurance industries, they're going to go under as well. And we will not have a choice at that point. So sorry for the wake-up call, Joe Biden.
Exactly. And not only that, but there's projections that, next year, assuming things return back to normal, premiums are going to go up by 40% or 30%, whatever it is. I mean, can you imagine the horror? So all of this is to say that it is now more important than ever to be advancing the case for Medicare for All. I mean, everyone would say, oh yeah, well, we want Medicare for All, but there's no chance that it's going to pass. Well, our current healthcare system is not going to emerge from this crisis the same, one way or the other. It's either, as I said, it's either going to get a lot better or it's going to get a lot worse. And so it is the job of left activists, of socialists, of progressive activists, to not stop, to be, twice as loud about the need for Medicare for All right now. And so I think that, the movements that have cohered in the last couple of years that have been inspired by Bernie Sanders have to keep, we can't be out in the streets. We can't be knocking on doors in the same way. But we have to use whatever means are at our disposal right now, because this is a time of crisis and a time of major upheaval in the institutions of our lives. And we have to make sure that upheaval goes in the progressive direction, not in the one of barbarism.
We need to make sure that we're pressuring the right political points, because we can't just show up on the doorsteps of the Capitol and flood the hallways of the Capitol like we were doing a couple of years ago. So, Micah, super interesting book. Go out and buy it, not on Amazon. Although there's only 4 left on Amazon, so.
They're just flying off the shelves.
If you want to buy him somewhere else, then buy him there so he's sold out. That's a great thing. Now is the time. We'd love to have you back on, possibly in studio, not here in Arizona, wherever. This studio will end up in New York at some point. Might be in my apartment, so I really appreciate it. And stay safe, stay healthy. Love to have you again soon.
Well, yes, same to you in terms of staying healthy, and thanks for having me on.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to Chris Smalls, Harvey Kaye, and Micah Uetricht, as well as our producer, Dorsey, back in New York. Don't forget, you got to tune into our live streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays, starting at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. I'll be taking your questions. So have a great week, stay safe and healthy, and I am so grateful to you.